So there are primary elections today in the states of North Carolina, Indiana, West Virginia, and Ohio, and pretty much all the results have been in the favor for the Republican Party. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Also, I apologize for not really covering this mainly. It wasn't of utmost importance when it comes to like my live streaming schedule. Probably when we see a couple more states, rather than just four compared to like 12 all in one night, then maybe I'll cover it. But I probably won't cover future primaries where it's just maybe 3 or 4 states because it's not as prominent as maybe other states would be, especially with these states not really being at the top of the list when we're talking about voter turnout and talking about indications for the 2018 midterms. Because in 2016, there are more Democrats voting on the Democratic primary than the Republicans, and we also saw how the general election turned out in West Virginia, and then in Indiana, it wasn't really of an accurate indication, and then Ohio, it wasn't, again, an accurate indication. But now I'm starting to see a trend, especially with the midterm elections coming up. A lot more people are voting for candidates that can win. This is no longer a presidential election. There are no options. There's just pure people that can win and can't win. So we're going to start off with a state like West Virginia. So first of all, Paula Jean Swearingen, Bernie Sanders type candidate. She got demolished in this Democratic primary. People thought that there is a possibility Joe Manchin would lose the primary, but obviously he didn't, and he won by near 70% of the vote, winning almost every county with 64% of the precincts reporting. But here's something to point out. I know this happened in 2016, but in midterm election years, Republicans are typically the ones to come out and vote. The Democrats have 109,000 votes. The Republicans have 92,000, with 1% reporting difference between the two. But right now, the Democrats are ahead in terms of voter turnout. And that's good news for them. Obviously, Joe Manchin, a mildly popular Democrat in a state that Donald Trump won by 42%, more than any candidate on the Republican side in that state, and actually more than any candidate in that state alone. And Joe Manchin right now is pretty much running it up across West Virginia. Let's talk about the Republican primary. This is why I think the Republican Party is in good favor tonight. Don Blankenship has not really cracked that 20% mark, and even if he does, it won't be that monumental. Evan Jenkins and Patrick Morrissey are probably the only two who are still being competitive, which is why the race hasn't been called yet. Don Blankenship really isn't that important. I mean, over here where Patrick Morrissey is pretty much running up across West Virginia, when it comes down to the population centers, that's where Evan Jenkins is probably going to get the remainder of his vote. You go over to Charleston, not much of the vote is in, but if you go to Patrick Morrissey's home county, 32 out of 32, 50 out of 66, 12 out of 13. There are a few counties, but then again, they have like hundreds of votes compared to thousands. And I think we're starting to see how Patrick Morrissey, although he took an early lead, I think we're seeing more of a Republican withdrawal away from the outsider-type candidate and moving towards someone who was at least formerly known in politics. Patrick Morrissey could edge this one out, but Evan Jenkins is still very much in play, and with Don Blankenship not even nearing possibility of overtaking either of them, this is good news for the Republicans. If they had him as the nominee, the GOP would have given up this seat so easily, and the Republicans are now at a point where they could actually make this competitive. Before, I thought Evan Jenkins would beat Joe Manchin. Right now, I'm a little iffy about it, but I think Patrick Morrissey can do it. I think he's better than Evan Jenkins when it comes to this because he is more of a businessman, someone who can more of a businessman than Evan Jenkins, but then again, still a politician. But then he knows the people of West Virginia a lot more. What Evan Jenkins isn't really that prominent across the state. Patrick Morrissey really has the name brand there, just based off his position in West Virginia. And I think he'll be able to better appeal to the West Virginia people than either Don Blankenship or Evan Jenkins. But then again, if either one of the nominee, again, it could become competitive. I just think Patrick Morrissey would be better, and he's probably he might edge this one out, but Evan Jenkins could come back with a couple of counties that are still coming in, which is why the race hasn't been called. We go over to Ohio. The United States Senate, again, good news for the Republicans. Josh Mandel obviously dropping out because of his wife's health a couple months ago. He was the front runner, ran in 2012, lost against Sherrod Brown. Jim Renacci, he right now has been projected the winner of the Republican primary. And if you look at the vote total, actually, if you look on CNN's vote total, Sherrod Brown has around 200,000, and the Republican primary has 484,000. That is good news for Republicans. The only good news in terms of primary turnout for Democrats would be in West Virginia, but Republicans right now are running up the map with in terms of voter turnout. And when we look at where we're seeing the vote come for all these Republicans. It's pretty much just evenly dispersed across the state. And although that may seem like there's division in the political party, that means a number of these counties are going to come back to the GOP. Now, I understand that the GOP doesn't always have the most accurate indications when it comes to how the 2016 primary did not correlate with what happened in the 2016 election, but I think we're starting to see something different. I think Jim Renacci, I don't know if it's Renacci or Renacci, but either way, regardless, I think this one could be competitive. Sherrod Brown needed a good Republican opponent. I think he can do it. He's already been projected the winner. There's no possibility of either two of these candidates or the rest of them overtaking the leader right now. And if you look in the important areas like Cleveland and Columbus and Dayton and Toledo, again, there's a little bit of a split between the Republican Party, but it just goes to show how the Republican Party is able to bring itself back in. They were divided over Donald Trump, but then at the end, they all moved in towards supporting him, and again, it worked out for him. I think that candidates shouldn't go uncontested. When they go uncontested, that means the entire state votes in one favor, and if there's anything wrong with the candidate, it'd pretty much be saying that the state does not denounce anything they do. When there's a primary opponent, as I think there should be for President Trump in 2020, things will change, and things about the candidate will change. If James Renacci ran unopposed, he probably wouldn't change any of his platform in order to better appeal to people. Now that he has an opponent and different parts of the state are voting with different candidates, I think he probably will change up his platform a little bit, get these supporters on his side, so that way in the 2018 midterm election, it will be solidified and his Republican base will be as strong because he's able to better appeal to these people. And then we go to the Republican primary in the governor's race. Mike DeWine, being a former senator, being a former representative, former lieutenant governor, beating the current lieutenant governor, Mary Taylor. Again, great news for the Republicans because his name has been out there for a long time. Mary Taylor is just lucky that her governor candidate was able to win and bring her across the finish line. And Mike DeWine pretty much built himself up, and I think his name is pretty much extremely well known across the state. Sure, he's lost a few elections, but 2018, we're leaving with John Kasich at one of the most popular governors in the United States. Mike DeWine will probably pass over and win this state in general. Richard Cordray in the governor's primary for the Democrats. Obviously, I'm pretty sure everyone knew he would win. Really not contested much across the state, which means that his campaign won't necessarily be the best. In West Virginia, Joe Manchin doesn't need to do much. He's loved by the people. But when we go into two candidates, neither who are incumbents, they really need to get their message out. And when it comes to governor races, that's where state and local issues really take major effect. And right now, this is in the favor for the Republicans because they have a candidate who's already been known statewide, Richard Cordray not being that well known. I mean, you could argue that he would be mildly known around the population centers, but then again, Ohio is a big state. The rural vote is extremely important. The white working class voter is extremely important. The only parts that Richard Cordray really has solidly in his column are the areas with heavy minority populations or urban areas, whereas Mike DeWine will pretty much win the remainder of the counties. And when it comes to the 2018 governor elections, I think Ohio will stay red just based off the fact that Republicans are better at state and local elections and the fact that John Kasich is the one leaving office. If it was an unpopular Republican, then maybe. But in a state like Ohio that voted for Donald Trump by around 9%, and especially since Republicans generally do better on state and local elections, I see it going to the Republicans. I'm going to try to hurry up with this one. So we go over to Indiana, not that important. Mike Braun, I expected him to win. Polls showed that he would win almost exactly by these margins too, which is really interesting. But Mike Braun pretty much has won across Indiana, but then again, his message will need to change. He's an outsider, meaning that he's not really well versed in politics. There will be some gaffes, as there was with President Trump. I don't know how well it will work in Indiana, but this is still good news because they have consistently gone to the outsider type candidate who also has previous history when we're talking about elections. So he does have mild. He will be well known across the state, and he will also be able to really get political favors just based off his previous history. He isn't like a representative like the other two candidates, but he still was in the, I believe, as a state legislator, and There's no other way to put it. I mean, he has minor election experience, which would be enough considering that he has won the primary, and this will be a seat that the Republicans will be talking about throughout 2018, and he will be able to not only grab a couple political favors instead of being a complete outsider, but he can also label himself as an outsider. He's no longer the stereotypical politician. Sure, he is mildly a politician, but then again, he didn't come from, as you would say, like inside Washington or from the swamp. And since we're talking about a Senate election, this couldn't necessarily accurately correlate with what we'll see in 2018 in the final general election. The primary probably won't make an impact on it, but when we're talking about the Senate, I think Mike Braun was probably the best choice for Indiana voters. And then we go over to North Carolina. Not that many important races, but what we are seeing here is that not many incumbents on the Republican side have been contested, and there aren't that many Republicans who are losing their seats. I mean, there are a few in the state Senate. I believe there's one House just right here, U.S. House District 9, where the incumbent is behind Mark Harris. I think that one probably will go to Mark Harris. I think it'll be one of the few things where an incumbent is beat in a primary. But other than that, consistent with the Republicans, uncontested, or if they are contested, they win by crazy margins, and that's just good for the Republican Party in general. When they have House districts are different than Senate, because the Senate covers the state as a whole, but when people know their representatives well enough to reelect them without having any opposition, that will really help solidify the Republican base going into the 2018 midterms, considering the House will be very closely watched. And looking at the state Senate races, I'm not really going to cover that, but state Senate and state House, pretty much very consistent. Republican and Democratic incumbents are almost all winning their primaries. Or maybe a little bit close, but they'll probably pull it off, and that's just good for both political parties in general. I'm not going to talk much about that. So just to run through, Ohio, good for the Republicans, good candidates. They're probably going to do well in the Senate and the governor election. In the United States Senate for West Virginia, watch these numbers with turnout amongst Democrats, but then again, Don Blankenship not being the nominee will be completely helpful. They're probably going to target this one a lot more now that they don't have a possibility of a Don Blankenship Senate candidate. And Indiana, again, good candidates on the Republican side. The Democrats being uncontested, and North Carolina, not that important, but incumbents being reelected by in the primaries by like 100% margins, or maybe 80-13. But yeah, so thank you guys for watching this video. I understand. I apologize for the video being all over the place. I just had to absorb everything in that I got when I was watching the primary coverage. But yeah, so thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.